Since we ran out of time in class and I really wanted to watch the movie, I'm going to go ahead and finish the end of this PowerPoint on human evolution. There are two models as to how we got different ethnic groups. The first model is referred to as the multi-regional model, in which our original population of Homo sapiens right here migrated 4 independent times and went in different directions. And of course, all the changes that took place over those thousands of years happened to occur similarly enough that we would have interbreeding. So we still maintain our species status. Of course, that would mean that we had independent evolution amongst 4 different lines, which seems to be highly unlikely. The second model is called the out of Africa hypothesis, and that, yes, we do see some of our distant ancestors, and we do have all those fossils that are in those same locations, but they, again, are not Homo sapiens. But that one group migrated out, and of course, here's where we separated out into our different populations, and then there were small micro changes in appearance. You could almost say like a founder's effect amongst, the Africans that stayed put, the Europeans that ended up being more successful with fair skin, the Asians with their eye folds, and then of course the Australians, which are a little different. They're not as light colored skin as the European. So we're talking like the Aborigines here. So not people that have colonized Australia from Britain. So there are some definite differences there with the Aboriginal population in Australia. So like I said, currently the Outer Africa model seems to be the one that has the most support, so that we are all descendants from a few individuals about 100,000 years before present. We've used mitochondrial DNA studies back in the 80s, and we're able to trace like all humans down to their original female, or the Eve. In 1992, we did have some studies that challenged this research and the methods used, but we're still sticking with our Outer Africa model. So here's a picture of those migration patterns again of our original population here being in Africa, and how we did migrate to different locations. Up here we're able to cross the Bering Strait during the Ice Age period to put humans on North and South America. So the challenge today using fossils and molecular techniques, this debate is, like I said, still being argued. Additional research is leaning to the Outer Africa model. Not only are we using mitochondrial DNA, but now we have found that we could also use the Y chromosome to find you could call Adam, or the first male Homo sapien. And again, that is also supporting the mitochondrial DNA information. So Homo sapiens are believed to have evolved from Homo erectus. Exactly how is a big debate. Again, once out of Africa, from one or many Homo erectus populations. These first appeared around 500,000 years ago, which includes the archaic or old forms of Homo sapiens referred to as Cro-Magnon. So in this slide, I am just showing you the difference between Homo erectus, Australopithecus, and Homo sapiens. And you can see the bone structures and how they're different, especially in the height. But again, focus on the slope of the forehead, which the more slope, the less cranial capacity, the pelvic girdle, the length of the bones in the leg for running versus tree climbing. So like I said, Cro-Magnon was a term that we used for modern man. The question is, did he outcompete the Neanderthals, or did they merge into one species? So mitochondrial DNA research has shown that Neanderthals' mitochondrial DNA is genetically very different than modern Europeans. So fossils have implicated the two populations did not intermingle. So this was a big area of debate as to what happened to the Neanderthals. We know that two species cannot occupy the same niche at the same time, and Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon would apparently fit that description in that they would both be competing for the same resources. So there was a lot of questions as to, did we kind of fuse or merge into one species, or did we basically outcompete and basically kill the Neanderthals? So like I said, the tale of two species. I kind of jumped ahead on that one. Like I said, it's known two species cannot occupy the same niche at the same time. And obviously Cro-Magnon was the more successful species at that time. Who knows, if conditions on our planet were different, maybe the Neanderthals would have been more adapted to the environment and we would not be here. So when we talk about modern man, Homo sapiens, he entered Asia and Europe around 100,000 years ago. The ethnic groups are a result of microevolution. We can talk about pigment. As we look at pigment, the more melanin protects us from UV light. Although when we have that amount, the darker amount of melanin, it is limiting the amount of UV light that can penetrate our skin and produce vitamin D. We need vitamin D in order to absorb calcium. So although you have calcium in your diet, you cannot actually absorb it and use it for bone ossification if you do not have vitamin D. Now, if you had darker skin and you live towards the equator, that's not a problem. You have plenty of sunshine. The problem is that sunshine mutating your DNA. So the melanin is there to protect the UV radiation's harmful effects on the DNA, plus you're still getting plenty of UV light to make vitamin D. As you move north or south away from the equator, the intensity of the sun decreases. Therefore, you're going to need to modify the amounts of melanin in order to still get the correct amount of UV light for vitamin D production and to protect you from its harmful effects. So you will notice as you move away from the equator, the skin coloration gets lighter and lighter. So if individuals had darker skin as they migrated up to Europe, they may not have had the ability to form nice strong bones and were not as successful as those that had a lighter pigmentation. The body shape is also referred to as the Bergmann's rule. We'll talk about that on the next slide. So the Bergmann's rule is when you live in colder climate, you have shorter limbs and bulkier body. And this goes back to our surface area to volume relationships. The more surface area you have, the more heat you're going to lose. So if you're more compact, you're going to limit the amount of heat loss. And as we know, as we move north, it gets colder. So again, we have something besides the Bergmann's rule. We have the Allen's rule, which includes shorter digits and ears. So all these things help to prevent loss of heat. The opposite could be said for the warmer climates. So basically what I'm saying is if you're tall, thin, and lanky, you can sufficiently get rid of heat in the hotter climates towards the equator. However, if you go away from that sunshine and that heat, you're going to be much more successful being stumpy, so short and stout. So those body shapes, again, would be more prevalent in the northern and far southern latitudes. So these characteristics cannot be explained physiologically, but may be due to population genetics and fixed traits due to genetic drift, or we could refer to like the founder's effect. We have that upper eyelid fold that we do know for some populations that does help with the glare off the snow, like with the Eskimos. Of course, when we look at Japan, they do not have that problem with snow being there and snow blindness. So again, it could be a matter of the founder's effect. Lip shapes. So we have like the African population with the big lips. We do not have a explanation for that. We cannot find, or at least to this date, we don't really have a a clear understanding how that adaptation makes an individual successful. Hair texture, I will say a little bit about hair texture. We're talking about the real kinky hair that we see in the African populations as well, or Moroccan, as I've researched. We'll see that kinky hair gene present. But we do know that with that particular type of oil that hair produces, that lice does not really like that oil they produce. So that might have been a successful adaptation for individuals that had that type of hair to lower or prevent lice infections, which you can imagine was probably prevalent back in those days. So that could be a positive adaptation for keeping that trait within the African population. But with that said, then you would expect that maybe in other areas of the world where lice is prevalent. But today we have medication that takes care of those little nasty buggers. And the last slide, I'm just showing you a bunch of different human skulls because I want you to know that this is not a linear progression. There are all kinds of branches and side groups and subspecies and species and tribes, as we found as a new classification, that formed and just were not successful, and so they led to dead ends. So, and this is just probably a fraction of the different types of skulls, the different hominid skulls that we have today. So I don't want you thinking again that this is a total linear progression that we have mapped out. We are still digging up bones today. So I hope this helps with your understanding of human evolution. And like I said, I did make some copies of Campbell's Human Evolution chapter. They're sitting in the back if you'd like to pick up some additional reading. And hopefully you guys are all prepared for Friday's test. Good luck studying.